In October of 2021, 64-year-old Konrad Imowitz was found unconscious and clinging to life at his Oakland County, Michigan home. He had been doused with a mixture of water and corrosive drain cleaner while napping on his sofa hours earlier, leaving his body covered in life-threatening chemical burns. Konrad was rushed to the hospital where he spent several months in intensive care before being sent home on hospice in March of 2022. He succumbed to his injuries just 3 days later, leading to charges against his 19-year-old daughter, Megan Joyce Imowitz, of felony unlawful possession or use of harmful devices, causing death and misdemeanor domestic violence. According to prosecutors, Megan attacked Konrad with caustic lie during a heated argument over his alcoholism after discovering that he was too drunk to drive her to a hair appointment ahead of her 18th birthday party. She then left the house without calling for help. Megan was held without bail while awaiting trial and faced a potential life sentence if convicted as charged. But she denied killing her father and chose to fight the charges. In July of 2023, the jury found her guilty as charged. The judge sentenced her to a year in prison with credit for time served, which meant that she would leave the courtroom a somewhat free woman. She was ordered to serve 5 years of strict probation, which includes requirements to wear a GPS monitor, abide by a 9 p.m. curfew, and undergo psychological and drug abuse assessments. The teen is also required to complete any treatment that she's ordered to undergo based on these evaluations, and to finish her high school education. Even Megan was surprised by the light sentence, telling Law and Crime after the court hearing that she was expecting a sentence of 3 to 6 years. Her family appeared to support the judge's ruling, and she said that she was going to treat her probation requirements as an opportunity to get her life on track and move forward. Megan described her father as her best friend and said that she missed him while accusing the prosecution of falsely portraying her as a monster. Both she and her mother made remarks about how the real story did not come out in court, but neither of the women have shared this supposedly unknown version of events with the media. Number 17. Michael Palomar. Michael Palomar was a teenager when he killed his 83-year-old neighbor in 1982. The victim, Morris Rosenhaft, caught Palomar burglarizing his home in Queens, New York, and attempted to strike him with a baseball bat, but Palomar grabbed the weapon and beat the senior citizen to death with it. With a previous burglary conviction already under his belt, Palomar pleaded guilty to manslaughter. He was paroled in 1999 after serving 16 years of a 25-year sentence and landed back in prison just 2 years later for a theft case. Following his release, he landed a job with New York City's Parks Department. In 2009, Palomar was accused of groping a woman while on the clock. He pleaded guilty to harassment, but managed to keep his job and was even promoted, landing him a comfortable six-figure salary. The Parks Department also continued to employ him years later when he was faced with additional misconduct allegations. According to the New York Post, Palomar was known among his colleagues for pressuring young female trainees into performing favors. One woman accused him of routinely groping her over a 2-year period, while warning her that nobody would believe a black girl from the Bronx if she reported him for it. Sources claim that there were other victims, but that most of them were afraid to speak out because they feared losing their jobs. In 2018, the Parks Department placed Palomar in a non-supervisory position while investigating the allegations, but none of the claims against him were substantiated. He's reportedly still employed by the agency, which has continued to come under fire for hiring workers with serious criminal histories. Number 16. Taylor Thompson. In August of 2023, 26-year-old Taylor Thompson of Wilmington, Ohio, made the regrettable decision to drive under the influence of alcohol. She struck 27-year-old Daniel Smith as he crossed the downtown intersection on foot at 2:15 a.m. and fled the scene without even calling for help, leaving him to die on the pavement. Smith died from his injuries, and Thompson was arrested several weeks later. She admitted to drinking at the bar where she worked before the accident and was subsequently indicted on charges of aggravated vehicular homicide, tampering with evidence, operating a vehicle while under the influence of drugs or alcohol, and 2 counts each of failure to stop after an accident and involuntary manslaughter. At the time of her arrest, Thompson had already been charged with DUI on 2 previous occasions. In both cases, she pleaded guilty to a reduced charge of being in physical control of a vehicle while under the influence. After the hit and run, she pleaded guilty to felony counts of reckless homicide, tampering with evidence, and failure to stop after an accident. Prosecutors urged the court to impose the maximum 8.5-year prison sentence, but the judge imposed a 4-year term, noting that Thompson had no prior felonies and had taken responsibility for her actions. Smith's family was disappointed by the outcome, which they feel is a far cry from justice for causing an innocent man's death. Speaking with Fox 19 after the sentencing hearing, Daniel's family described feeling a lack of closure over the seemingly lenient sentence, which comes with a release date of July 2028. Number 15. Crosetti Brand. A pregnant 33-year-old single mother of 2 named Lateria Smith was getting her kids ready for school one morning in March of 2024 when her knife-wielding ex-boyfriend, 37-year-old Crosetti Brand, forced his way into their apartment in Chicago's Edgewater neighborhood. Brand stabbed the woman's son, Jaden Perkins, to death as he tried to shield his mother, who survived after being rushed to the hospital in critical condition with multiple stab wounds. A surveillance camera captured footage of Brand tossing the murder weapon over a fence. As he fled the scene on foot, he was later captured and booked into custody on charges of attempted murder, home invasion with a dangerous weapon, aggravated domestic battery, robbery with a dangerous weapon, felon possession of a weapon, and violating an order of protection. Brand had dated Smith 15 years earlier, and she had a lifetime order of protection against him. But this didn't stop him from sending her threatening text messages and showing up at her home on various occasions. He had also been paroled the day before the attack after his latest prison stint for violating the order of protection, leading to widespread criticism and outrage towards the authorities for cutting him loose despite the obvious danger he posed to the victims. Less than 2 weeks after Brand's arrest, Illinois Parole Board member Leanne Miller and Prisoner Review Board Chair Donald Shelton resigned. While Shelton's reasons for stepping down are unclear, Miller had conducted Brand's parole hearing and recommended him for release. Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker said that he believed Miller had made the correct decision to step down, adding, "It's clear that evidence in this case was not given the careful consideration that victims of domestic violence deserve." According to the most recent available updates on the case, Brand was in custody while awaiting trial. Number 14. The murder of Elias Valdez. High school student Elias Valdez was stabbed to death by one of his peers in the Chicago suburb of Glenview during a botched drug deal in August of 2020. According to police, he was attempting to take marijuana from a fellow member of his wrestling team without paying. A fight ensued between the young men, and Valdez was stabbed repeatedly in the chest with a utility tool. He was pronounced dead at a nearby hospital after being left to die along the roadside, and the perpetrator was charged with second-degree murder, despite the victim's family's wish for a first-degree murder charge. Valdez's loved ones were even more outraged when the accused killer was granted bail, and one can only imagine how they felt when the defendant pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 3 years of probation in lieu of prison time, while handing down the punishment, which included 100 hours of community service and a requirement to undergo counseling. The judge took an unusually sympathetic tone, stating that he did not believe the teen was a murderer. Despite the nature of his conviction, the defense denied speculation by the victim's family that the young man had received special treatment, noting that it takes 2 to make a drug deal and that Mr. Valdez was a buyer. Number 13. Roy Wayne Russell. Roy Wayne Russell was sentenced to life without parole in the Washington State prison system for setting his ex-girlfriend's apartment on fire in 1998. But he was released Just a few years later, after successfully appealing his conviction, he managed to secure his freedom by challenging the state's 3 strikes law, which allows courts to impose harsher punishments for repeat offenders. The appeals court vacated Russell's sentence after deciding that a previous kidnapping conviction did not qualify as a strike because it did not meet the level of seriousness that was required in order for it to be held against him in future sentencing decisions. In 2005, just 4 years after his release from prison, Russell murdered high school freshman Chelsea Harrison, who was found dead in the basement bathroom of the 45-year-old's Vancouver apartment. According to prosecutors, he strangled the victim to death after all the other guests had left a drug and alcohol-fueled party at his residence, then fled the scene. He later admitted to killing Harrison, and in January of 2006 he was convicted of second-degree murder. This time Russell had enough strikes for the judge to impose a life sentence without parole. But he managed to defeat the 3-strike system once again after the state amended the law in 2019. Based on the changes, one of his strikes for an out-of-state robbery conviction could no longer be held against him, thereby no longer qualifying him as a 3-strike offender. In 2022, Russell was resentenced to a little over 26 years with credit for roughly 16.5 years of time served, which means that he could see freedom again in just a handful of years. Harrison's family is understandably devastated and outraged by the ruling, which could result in Russell being released back into society by the age of 70, but he remains incarcerated for the time being. Number 12. Brin Speter. 28-year-old Brin Speter had only recently started dating 26-year-old Chad O'Melia when she stabbed him to death at his apartment in Thousand Oaks, California, in May of 2018. The pair had met just weeks earlier when police responded to a call at the residence and found Speter crying hysterically next to O'Melia's body while clutching the knife she had just killed him with. She had also stabbed her dog and was injured while being taken into custody due to her refusal to cooperate with law enforcement. Speter was charged with O'Melia's murder but argued in court that she committed the act in a state of cannabis-induced psychosis. According to her attorneys, she was an inexperienced marijuana smoker and had already gotten high off just one hit. When O'Melia pressured her to take a second hit, she had an adverse reaction to the pot, causing her to run into the bathroom in a panic before emerging a few minutes later and attacking O'Melia. Under California law, a person is responsible for the things they do while intoxicated, unless their intoxication was involuntary. The jury found Speter guilty of the lesser charge of involuntary manslaughter based on the argument that O'Melia had pressured her to take a second hit of cannabis when she was already high. Judge David Worley sentenced her to 2 years of probation and 100 hours of community service, noting in his decision that she had no control over her behavior when she killed the victim. Speter's defense attorney, Bob Schwartz, described the judge's decision as the right and courageous thing, while O'Melia's father, Sean O'Melia, accused Worley of setting a dangerous precedent by giving marijuana smokers throughout the state a license to kill and get away with it. The victim's uncle, Brandon, was also disappointed with the decision, noting that while there are no winners in the tragedy, there could have at least been accountability. Number 11. Terry Friet. A night of heavy drinking in the forest took a tragic turn for 2 British men in May of 2018 when an argument escalated into physical violence. 30-year-old Terry Friet unintentionally choked 28-year-old Philip Barry to death during a disagreement, later telling police that he had acted in self-defense when Barry kept charging at him. He only meant to restrain his friend, who suffered from schizophrenia and was known to abuse drugs and alcohol. Friet and Barry reportedly met just weeks before the deadly fight. They spent a lot of time together and were on an all-day drinking binge when Friet began complaining to the group they were with about Barry never having money for alcohol. The 2 men eventually went off into the woods together, but only Friet emerged alive. After killing Barry, he went home in a panic and told his father what had happened. Nearly an hour later, he made his way to a corner store and called the police. When an employee asked him why he killed his friend, Friet said, "He pushed me He led officers to the crime scene and was taken into custody on suspicion of murder. Friet already had a lengthy criminal history consisting of 34 prior convictions, but he maintained that he did not mean to kill Barry. He also claimed that he had performed chest compressions on the victim in an attempt to revive him, but admitted that he failed to stop restraining Barry even after the victim no longer posed a threat to his safety. Much to the disappointment of Barry's family, Friet pleaded guilty to manslaughter and received a 5.5-year prison sentence. Following the sentencing, Barry's family told the press that they did not believe he would have threatened Friet or anyone else's safety. Barry's best friend's grandfather, Ron Hale, described the victim as a gentle and non-confrontational person who was always considerate of other people's feelings. Based on Barry's personality, his loved ones believed that Friet was the aggressor and deserved to be taken to trial. They wanted his fate to be based on evidence and witness testimony, which was never presented in court due to his decision to plea out. The defense saw the situation differently, claiming that Barry would probably still be alive if he and Friet hadn't been drinking and using drugs that day, while the court concluded that Friet had taken self-defense too far, but wasn't a cold-blooded murderer. Number 10. Zabia Zarate. In what may have seemed like a harmless, albeit disgusting prank, teenager Brett Cardenas and his friend threw excrement at the front door of 41-year-old Zabia Zarate's Austin, Texas home in April of 2022, enraged by the gesture. Zarate got in his SUV and chased after the teens as they fled on their bicycles. Once he caught up with them, he exited his vehicle and began beating Cardenas, unaware that his SUV had started to roll toward them. As a witness attempted to break up the fight, the vehicle ran over Cardenas, who died from his injuries, and Zarate was charged with manslaughter. As tragic and avoidable as the middle schooler's death was, the prosecution opted not to pursue a murder charge because it did not appear as though Zarate intended to kill Cardenas. He had either forgotten to put his vehicle in park or for some reason had unknowingly failed to engage the parking gear, leading to the tragic accident that claimed the young man's life. In 2024, Zarate pleaded guilty to manslaughter in exchange for a 10-year probation sentence, sparing him from any prison time. The judge also ordered him to serve 300 hours of community service, attend anger management, and pay $17,000 in restitution to the Cardenas family if he violates the terms of his supervision at any point over the next decade. He could end up serving the remainder of his time behind bars. Zarate's defense attorney commended the prosecution for taking a long, hard look at the case and realizing that it was a horrible, terrible, tragic accident. But the outcome came as a major disappointment to the victim's family, who described Zarate's sentence as a slap on the wrist and a soft plea deal, and they were understandably unmoved by Zarate's apology and his reassurance that he was taking responsibility for his role in the tragedy. Number 9. Johannes Mel. Oscar Grant III was traveling on a BART train in Oakland, California on New Year's Day in 2009 when he and 4 friends were detained by police in response to a report about a fight. The police would later claim that the men reacted angrily and that an equally enraged group of bystanders surrounded the scene. The 2 officers who responded to the incident called for backup amid the chaos, and 5 additional cops soon arrived. Among them was rookie officer Johannes Mel, who had finished his training just weeks earlier. In his attempts to remove Grant's right hand from beneath his body, Mel announced his intention to use his taser, but he grabbed his gun instead and shot Grant in the back. Grant was rushed to the hospital where he died after undergoing emergency surgery. In the meantime, Mel told interrogators that he had accidentally shot Grant when he meant to use his taser, and that he feared that Grant was reaching into his waistband for a gun. He was noticeably upset and expressed remorse for the deadly mistake, but was nevertheless charged with murder. The case was highly divisive among the public, with many believing that Mel was simply doing his job. By the time he was released on $3 million bail, courtesy of donations from his supporters, cell phone footage of the shooting had gone viral. The video was met with widespread outrage, sparking numerous riots and protests demanding justice for Grant. If convicted as charged, Mel could have faced life in prison. A jury found him guilty of the lesser charge of involuntary manslaughter, which carries a 4-year maximum prison sentence along with a gun enhancement, which could have extended the sentence by 3 to 10 years. The judge dropped the enhancement conviction and sentenced Mel to 2 years in prison with double credit for time served, effectively reducing his term by more than 9 months. Naturally, many people were outraged by the outcome of the case because they felt Mel deserved a much harsher punishment. On the other hand, Mel's supporters believed that he deserved to be absolved of any wrongdoing and that the verdict and sentence reflected a gross injustice against him. And while Mel acted apologetic at his sentencing hearing, he appealed his case a few years later because he wanted to return to police work, which was not possible due to his criminal conviction. The appeal was denied, and Grant has since been memorialized in a mural at the very station where he was killed more than 15 years ago. Number 8. Jermaine Clark. Just days before Christmas in December 2023, 30-year-old Jermaine Clark was caught driving a stolen Nissan Maxima in Memphis, Tennessee. He was arrested following a pursuit through the city's New Chicago area, where police managed to disable the vehicle using spike strips. Clark fled on foot into a nearby wooded area but was quickly apprehended by members of law enforcement, who also found a gun that he had tossed from the car during the case. He was charged with drag racing, being a convicted felon in possession of a handgun, evading arrest in a vehicle, distributing a controlled substance, possession of a firearm while committing a dangerous felony, property theft in the amount of $10,000 to $60,000, reckless driving, and driving with a suspended driver's license. This was far from Clark's first brush with the law. In 2012, he admitted to fatally shooting a teenager during an argument and was sentenced to 5 years of probation for manslaughter. Clark was arrested numerous times over the following years on a multitude of charges, including drug possession, felony theft, trespassing, bringing contraband into a penal facility, evading arrest, disorderly conduct, and more. The status of his current case is unclear. Number 7. Nicholas Shaughnessy and Jaclyn Edison. In March of 2018, 55-year-old Texas jeweler Theodore Ted Shaughnessy and his wife Corey awoke to an unwelcome presence in their Travis County home at 4 o'clock in the morning. Ted confronted the intruders with a .45 caliber pistol in his hand, but was shot dead before he had a chance to defend himself with it. Corey also had a handgun and opened fire on the intruders, who fled the scene. In addition to grappling with the devastation and trauma of her husband's death, she fell under scrutiny as a suspect in the case. Detectives eventually shifted their focus to the Shaughnessy's adopted son, Nicholas, and his wife Jaclyn Edison, after learning that Nicholas had told people he stood to gain his family's business and an $8 million inheritance upon his parents' deaths. The couple had moved in with Nicholas's parents just 3 months before Ted's murder, after their wanton spending habits left them unable to financially support themselves. 2 months after the shooting, Nicholas and Jaclyn were charged with criminal solicitation based on the suspicion that they had hired hitmen to kill Ted. While 4 more years would pass before Jaclyn was indicted, Nicholas took a plea deal and admitted to a murder charge in exchange for a 35-year prison term. While Corey agreed to the terms of the agreement, many of the Shaughnessy's loved ones believed the deal was too lenient. A pair of hired hitmen also pleaded guilty and received the same sentence. Jaclyn eventually admitted that she knew about the planned murder ahead of time. After initially downplaying her role in the crime, text messages proved that she played an active role in the sinister plot to eliminate Ted from the picture. But her willingness to cooperate against the other defendants landed her a sweetheart plea deal, resulting in a 120-day jail sentence for a conspiracy charge. She has avoided media interviews but told a reporter as she was leaving the courthouse that she believed the outcome of her case was fair and accurately reflected her level of involvement in the crime. Many disagree, including Nicholas, who insists to this day that Jaclyn played an equal part in what he described as a 50-50 conspiracy. Number 6. Andre Dwayne Win Jr. Kendarius Dwayne Martin was just 19 years old and was 3 days away from graduating high school when his life was cruelly ripped away from him in Dothan, Alabama in 2017. He was looking forward to attending college on a football scholarship that he had recently accepted, but he never got the chance to fulfill the opportunity because someone murdered him in a drive-by shooting in broad daylight. The shooter, Dwayne Win Jr., was also just a teenager, but he already had a lengthy rap sheet which included a prior gun charge from when he was just 11 years old. 2 weeks before the shooting that killed Martin, he was charged with attempted assault with a deadly weapon in an unrelated case. Win also reportedly had a history of arson, theft, tampering with evidence and more, and was supposed to be on probation at the time of Martin's death. Unfortunately, prosecutors chose not to charge Win as an adult for Martin's death, despite his history. In 2019, roughly 2 years after the shooting, he was sentenced to serve 30 months in addition to the time he spent in pre-trial detention. The driver, Ashanti Williams, pleaded guilty to manslaughter and was sentenced to 11 years in prison, with credit for 22 months of time served. At the time of his sentencing, he was also facing car theft charges in Florida, where he ended up serving a 2-year sentence before being extradited back to Alabama. Number 5. The murder of Ovea Herring in what police later described as a gang-related shooting. A pregnant 21-year-old woman named Ovea Herring was murdered in an ambush of gunfire at her Portland, Oregon apartment in August of 2014. The incident occurred just hours after a fight between members of the Hoover and Woodlawn Park Bloods gangs in the downtown area, and the evidence showed that at least 6 guns were used in the crime. A neighbor later told police that 3 gunmen burst into her apartment shortly before the shooting occurred, while 4 additional armed men stood outside the residence. The intruders reportedly pointed a gun at the woman and her children and demanded to know the whereabouts of Dre Steves, Herring's boyfriend, and a rival gang member they were looking for in their attempts to exact vengeance for the previous fight. She told the men that Steves did not live at the apartment and pointed in the direction of Herring's unit in response to their demands to know which apartment Steves lived in. Authorities subsequently charged 6 known Hoover gang members in connection with the case, including Demetrius Ray Brown, Tony Lamar Brown, Gionte Brashord Jones, DeAnthony Simmons, Kilani Brown, and Jeffrey Lamont Sims. Tony Lamar Brown pleaded guilty to murder with a firearm, burglary, and unlawful use of a weapon. Gionte Jones pleaded guilty to murder and manslaughter, but neither of the men appear to be in state or federal custody, leaving their current circumstances unclear. In July of 2019, nearly 5 years after the shooting, Jeffrey Sims pleaded guilty to a reduced manslaughter charge. He was sentenced to 6 years and 3 months in prison with credit for time served while in pre-trial detention, effectively reducing his remaining time to less than 2 years. Herring's mother expressed her disappointment at the outcome in a victim impact speech, stating that injustice is spreading like wildfire, adding that she disagreed with the plea deal that Sims was offered and would have rather let a jury decide his fate. In 2022, DeAnthony Simmons pleaded guilty to reduced manslaughter and burglary charges in exchange for a 10-year prison sentence, while Kilani Brown was sentenced to 7.5 years for the same charges. The men were slated to go to trial but were offered plea deals at the 11th hour when reluctant witnesses refused to testify for the prosecution out of a fear for their safety. Demetrius Brown, who was also a suspect in another murder, was found incompetent to stand trial and ordered to undergo treatment at a state mental hospital. Number 4. A Lacy. An Indiana mother committed the unthinkable in August of 2022 when she smothered her own daughter to death at their Indianapolis home. Police arrived at the scene to find A Lacy unresponsive, but several months passed before A Lacy was arrested for the girl's death. In the initial aftermath of the tragedy, Lacy told investigators that she was in another room preparing lunch for her other kids when Alona passed away. She said she believed Alona's death was an accident, but that her older daughter began crying when she asked her about what had happened. 3 days later, Alona's father told detectives that the older daughter had implicated her mother in the girl's death. Investigators attempted to interview the young witness but did not glean any useful information, and an autopsy ruled the case of death as undetermined. Weeks later, A drug test revealed that Lacy had methamphetamine in her system on the day of Alona's death. When confronted with the evidence, Lacy admitted to smothering Alona while high on methamphetamine because the victim wouldn't stop crying and she was desperate to sleep. She insisted that she didn't mean to kill Alona and was charged with neglect of a dependent, resulting in death. In a shocking twist, Marion County Judge Mark Stoner found Lacy not guilty following a 3-day bench trial. While delivering his decision, he noted that he believed Lacy had committed involuntary manslaughter, but because she wasn't charged with that crime, he couldn't find her guilty of it. He told Lacy, "You're not innocent, but you're not guilty of what the state has charged you with," adding that poor parenting by definition isn't criminal. Number 3. Chris Boucher. 37-year-old Chris Boucher was riding his bicycle in downtown San Francisco in March of 2012 when he ran a red light at a busy intersection and crashed into a group of pedestrians, including 71-year-old Suchi Hui. The elderly victim hit his head on the ground and succumbed to his injuries 4 days later, resulting in Boucher's arrest on a felony manslaughter charge. According to then District Attorney George Gascoigne, Boucher ran at least 2 stop signs before speeding into the intersection where the light was red. After the accident and before Hui's death, Boucher claimed that he thought the light was still yellow. He also defended his actions on an online cycling forum, arguing that the crosswalk filled with pedestrians before he had time to pass through. Unable to stop and left with no option, Boucher claimed that he more or less aimed his bike for the least populated section of the crosswalk, which stood in stark contrast to witness reports about him riding recklessly and plowing into the crowd with no apparent concern with avoiding a collision. He was accused of showing a disturbing lack of remorse in the posts. Boucher eventually decided to take responsibility for his actions and pleaded guilty to vehicular manslaughter, making him the first cyclist in U.S. history to be convicted of the charge. In accordance with the wishes of Hui's family, he was spared from prison time and sentenced to 3 years of probation along with 1,000 hours of community service. He was also given the opportunity to have his conviction reduced to a misdemeanor if he abided by the terms of his sentence for 6 months. The victim's son, Terry Hui, requested that the time be spent serving the elderly and people with traumatic brain injuries and building houses for the less fortunate. He further stated, "Please don't squander the second chance you have to become a good and compassionate person, not to be the narcissistic person you were when you wrote the insensitive web posting about my father." In 2018, Boucher published a book and launched a podcast entitled Bikelash: How San Francisco Created America's First Bicycle Felon. He depicted himself as a victim, describing his crime as a TV felony and accusing Gascoigne of maliciously pursuing the case in a bid to advance his political career. Boucher also accused the prosecution of manipulating the press by misconstruing facts and leaking inaccurate details as a way to deprive criminal defendants of due process. At around the same time the podcast was launched, the convicted killer admitted during an interview with the San Francisco Chronicle that he had failed as a cyclist in his moral responsibility to keep everyone safe. Meanwhile, a district attorney spokesperson told the news outlet that Boucher blamed the prosecution, pedestrians and others for felony conviction, but that talk is cheap and actions speak louder than words. Today's topic was requested by Candy Kretz 8526 and Fen Carroll 9463. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Justin Flores. Corporal Michael Paredes and Officer Joseph Santana tragically lost their lives while responding to a reported stabbing in El Monte, California in June of 2022. They were immediately met with gunfire upon arriving at the Siesta Inn outside Los Angeles and returned fire in self-defense, striking 35-year-old Justin Flores. The officers were pronounced dead at a nearby hospital, and Flores also succumbed to his injuries. According to reports, Flores had followed his wife, Diana, to the motel where she had booked a room to get away from him after he assaulted her. Diana's mother, who made the 911 call, had warned an emergency dispatcher that the suspect was dangerous and possibly under the influence of PCP. Flores was a known gang member whose criminal history included 2 previous prison terms. In 2009, he served less than 2 months of a 16-month sentence for stealing a car. He was discharged from parole the following year, only to be convicted of first-degree burglary months later. In that case, he was sentenced to 2 years but was freed after serving 9 months. Just months prior to the shootout with the police, Flores was convicted of being a felon in possession of a firearm. He could have served a 3-year prison term for the gun charge, but was sentenced to 2 years of probation the day before the shooting. Flores' probation officer had filed paperwork to charge him with a violation for assaulting his girlfriend. Despite his criminal history, he was allowed to walk free while awaiting an upcoming court hearing to address the matter. Many people criticized the authorities for not immediately detaining him for the violation charge and for imposing lenient sentences against Flores for his past crimes. LA County's infamously easy-on-crime district attorney, George Gascon, defended his office's handling of the cop killer's past cases, describing Flores as a drug addict with no history of violence. He argued that it was appropriate to spare the convict from prison time for the illegal gun charge, which would have possibly prevented the deadly confrontation with Paredes and Santana. If you haven't had your daily dose of They Will Kill You just yet, then stick around after number 1, because we've got our release of 12 evil students who went after teachers coming right up. Number 1. Mathia Mae Spicer. In May of 2018, 19-year-old Mathia Mae Spicer was accused of helping her boyfriend, 20-year-old William Bonham, in his efforts to hire a hitman in Brighton, Michigan. At the time, Bonham was locked up on a pending larceny charge at the Livingston County Jail, where he solicited fellow inmate Dale McLaughlin to kill a witness in his case. McLaughlin told the authorities about the plan and secretly recorded conversations with Bonham, resulting in the arrests of Bonham and Spicer for their roles in the murder-for-hire plot. Bonham was charged as a fourth-strike habitual offender with solicitation to commit murder and solicitation to commit larceny over $20,000. He could have faced life in prison but was sentenced to 7 to 25 years after pleading no contest to witness intimidation, solicitation to commit larceny over $20,000 and other charges. Spicer, who was accused of dropping off a pickup meant as a partial down payment for the murder, was charged with accessory after the fact to the solicitation of murder, while no one was actually murdered in this case. Things could have turned out much differently if McLaughlin hadn't alerted law enforcement to the situation. This, coupled with Spicer's incredibly light sentence, warranted a mention on today's list. She could have faced up to 5 years in prison if convicted of the crime, but was spared from any time behind bars and received a 6-month probation sentence after pleading guilty as charged. The lenient sentence was imposed under Michigan's Holmes Youthful Trainee Act, and it also gave Spicer an opportunity to have her record expunged once she fulfilled all of her court-ordered requirements. After allegedly assaulting a teacher in Killeen, Texas, a 17-year-old was held in the Bell County Jail in December of 2019. The incident, which unfolded on December the 2nd, happened while Tyler Cravens was under an in-school suspension due to a prior offense. As cell phone use wasn't permitted for suspended students, teacher Sam Jones reportedly collected the student's devices. Cravens subsequently rushed Jones and pushed him over a desk. According to law enforcement records, a portion of the attack was caught on video, which appeared to show Jones on the floor as he was being punched by the student, suffering knee and shoulder injuries in the process. Eventually, Cravens was escorted out of the classroom, but he continued to be aggressive, according to the arrest affidavit. On December the 10th, the teen was charged as an adult with third-degree felony assault on a public servant and held on a $35,000 bond. Number 11. Texas freshman. An investigation was launched in Fort Worth, Texas, after a video of a high schooler being aggressive toward her teacher was posted online in November of 2021. The footage showed a Castleberry High School freshman approach a substitute teacher who was on the phone and pressed the receiver to end the call. When the woman tried to move the student's hand away, the teen slapped her arm. The girl then proceeded to use the phone, saying she'd call her mother as she shouted profanities at the substitute. She subsequently commented on the teacher's race while talking on the phone. In the aftermath, the mother of the girl, Brittany Evans, told WFAA she was sorry for her daughter's behavior and didn't know where she learned the racially offensive language she was using. Evans added that her daughter, who was autistic and bipolar, was facing a 3-day suspension as a consequence. Number 10. Special education student in Dallas. In January of 2021, an attack carried out by a 17-year-old special needs student during class eventually gave way to a lawsuit against the Independent School District of Dallas, Texas. On January the 8th, Charla Sims, a special education teaching assistant at Spruce High School, allegedly suffered physical violence at the hands of one of her male students. Following the attack, the 56-year-old suffered from intense pain in her abdomen. Doctors reportedly discovered a tear in her aorta, which eventually caused her to become paralyzed. She succumbed to her injuries on January the 11th. The victim's family claimed that they'd only found out about the incident when a former district employee made a disclosure in September of 2022 about the administration's alleged failure to take action in response to the attack. The family's attorneys claimed there were at least 3 other documented assaults involving the same student. On January the 4th of 2023, Sims's family filed a federal lawsuit accusing the Dallas Independent School District of negligence. They demanded reform in the district's classrooms and sought $20 million in damages. Number 9. Russian student. A staggering moment in which a Russian teen in the town of Neryongry was stopped by his classmates from hitting their teacher was caught on camera and subsequently went viral. The video, which was posted in October of 2016, showed the male teacher reportedly struggling to gain the attention of the student in question, who had his headphones on in the middle of a class. After the boy ignored him, the teacher took his device away. The boy then stood up and shouted at the teacher before charging him and throwing a punch. The rest of the class subsequently intervened, pulling the incensed student away. The group managed to take the boy out of the classroom to defuse the situation. The Daily Mail reported that the teacher refused to press charges, although law enforcement did conduct an investigation after the video gained traction online. This picture was also taken to the Russian school, so it looks like teachers don't have it very easy over there. Number 8. North Carolina middle school student. An 8th grade teacher at Topsail Middle School in Hampstead, North Carolina, sued the school board and district leaders after being attacked by a special needs student on April the 19th of 2018. The incident occurred toward the end of Kimberly Burns Fisher's inclusion class, in which the student was called out for saying the word moron. Burns Fisher told the teenage boy to bring over his communication log. Upon approaching the teacher, the boy threw his book back at her, hitting her head. He then lunged at her, knocking her into a chair. When Burns Fisher fell, the student began kicking her in the head and back, leaving her with a concussion, a cut on the face, and a black eye. According to the Pender County Sheriff's Office, a secure order was issued against the student on April the 24th after the findings of an investigation into the assault were submitted to the state's Department of Juvenile Justice. Following the ordeal, Burns Fisher's injuries made it impossible for her to work. 3 years later, she accused the school's principal at the time of the incident, the Pender County Board of Education, and the superintendent of ignoring warning signs and failing to act prior to the attack. The lawsuit claimed that the student who attacked Burns Fisher had 14 prior incidents of violence and that the defendants had knowledge of his behavioral troubles since 2011. As of the latest updates made in January of 2023, the federal courts were upholding a qualified immunity defense and would clear the former principal of responsibility for damages. The legal claims against the school board and the superintendent were still pending. Number 7. Jordan Lee. In April of 2023, a Texas student was held in custody on a $40,000 bond after assaulting a teacher at Jasper High School. Following the attack, which occurred on April the 6th, an arrest warrant was issued for 18-year-old Jordan Lee. She immediately turned herself in at the Jasper County Jail. The following week, she was charged with 1 count of injury to an elderly person with intent to cause bodily injury and 1 count of assaulting a public servant. She was facing the possibility of spending between 2 and 10 years behind bars as a result. It's unclear if the motive for the assault had yet been determined, but detectives were working with the school's resource officer to further investigate. Number 6. Larana Jackson. A Louisiana teen relentlessly pummeled her 64-year-old wheelchair-bound teacher on October the 6th of 2021. Gruesome footage of the attack showed 18-year-old Covington High School student Larana Jackson talking to the elderly woman before unleashing her vicious assault. As the educator fell to the floor, Jackson continued throwing closed fist punches. Injuries sustained in the attack caused the victim to seek medical attention. Subsequently, Jackson was arrested and held in the St. Tammany Parish Jail on a felony battery charge. According to local police, the attack was motivated by a TikTok challenge. The next day, 2 additional suspects were charged with unlawful posting of criminal activity. 18-year-old Trinity Gervais and an unnamed juvenile turned themselves into law enforcement after they'd been identified by detectives. The latter was released on a custodial agreement. In March of 2022, Gervais pleaded guilty to recording and posting the incident online. On September the 21st, Jackson pleaded guilty to second-degree battery and cruelty to the infirmed. She was sentenced to 5 years of incarceration, with 4 years suspended, to be followed by 3 years of probation with mental health counseling and anger management classes. Number 5. Dour Russell and Christopher Taylor. In southern Nigeria, an assault occurred at Calabar High School after 33-year-old teacher Sanjay Shaw tried to borrow beds for students joining a physics camp on December the 15th of 2018. The track team on campus attempted to steal the beds from the physics lab. They were reportedly aggressive, kicking the door open as they entered the lab. Camera footage revealed that 18-year-old Dour Russell and Christopher Taylor, aged 19, together with other student athletes, got into a heated verbal exchange with Shaw. One of the athletes reportedly slapped Shaw's phone, which he was using to record the incident. A track team member then stepped on the device to keep Shaw from retrieving, causing a piece of glass from the phone to pierce Shaw's palm. The incident was reported to school officials, but no disciplinary actions were taken until March the 12th of the following year, when Russell and Taylor were suspended for a week. The latter was still allowed to compete during the duration of his suspension. Number 4. Florida preschooler. A teacher was beaten on the morning of March the 2nd of 2022, but charges weren't filed due to the age of the student responsible. The incident, which took place at Pines Lakes Elementary School in Pembroke Pines, Florida, started after Trisha Meadows' preschool class became unruly. The special needs teacher had to take one of them to another room. Meadows subsequently requested support on the school radio after the boy attacked and jumped on her with his full body weight. When responders arrived, they found the teacher weak and dazed, coughing and dry heaving. She was rushed to Memorial Regional Hospital, where she was intubated due to her severe injuries. In the aftermath, Meadows didn't want to prosecute the student. Legal experts told NBC News that the boy lacked the criminal intent needed for prosecution. Number 3. Odessa 8th grader. After having his phone confiscated, an 8th grader at Bowie Middle School in Odessa, Texas, violently attacked his teacher. Footage of the incident, which was posted in September of 2022, showed the teen talking to the teacher before trying to get the confiscated device back. A struggle ensued, which quickly escalated to violence as the boy threw punches and grabbed the teacher's hair. At one point, the woman fell to the ground as the student kept pummeling her. In the aftermath, the boy was charged with aggravated assault on a public servant, a first-degree felony. According to CBS, he was sentenced to 4 years of probation in order to perform 56 hours of community service. Additionally, the judge ordered his parents to attend a parenting class. Number 2. Brendan Deeper. On February the 21st of 2023, Brendan Deeper from Palm Coast, Florida, was accused of assaulting a teacher's aide, who reportedly took his Nintendo Switch. Gruesome CCTV footage taken at Matanzas High School showed the 17-year-old rushing up to the woman and pushing her to the ground before punching and kicking her. The violent attack was stopped after a group of people restrained the teen. Deeper was arrested, then released from the Juvenile Justice Department's custody the next day. When his case was transferred to adult court, he was rearrested on February the 24th on a felony count of aggravated battery. He was jailed on a $1 million bond and was facing the possibility of spending up to 30 years behind bars. Number 1. Georgia 9th grader. A 9th grader at Heritage High School in Conyers, Georgia, was jailed for attacking a longtime teacher, Tiwana Turner, on January the 26th of 2023. Turner later said that she was trying to correct the female student's distracted behavior by taking her phone. The girl subsequently went off, attacking the teacher and throwing her to the ground, at which point she rained down a flurry of strikes. Turner was hospitalized for knee injuries and a broken leg. The student was charged with aggravated battery, to which she pleaded guilty. As Fox 5 Atlanta reported in April of 2023, she was sentenced to a year at a youth detention center, followed by a 5-year term of supervised release. Thanks for watching. Would you rather see the death penalty be abolished or kept in place, and why? Let us know in the comment section below.